What if the greatest threat to a military leader's career isn't incompetence, but silent internal pressure no one is trained to address? Welcome to the Happiness on Tap podcast, where we bring you real conversations about growth, healing, and transformation. I'm your host, Leanne Herron, and today I am joined by Chris Viveros, Navy Chief Veteran, founder of the Bearded Coach, LLC, and a leadership advisor serving military families navigating the invisible weight of responsibility. With over 20 years as a Navy chief in medical operations, a master's in human services counseling, and a PhD in Bible exposition in progress, Chris works at the intersection of moral injury, identity conflict, faith integration, and high stakes leadership. His clients aren't failing, they're functional, capable, respected, but they're under pressure that isn't sustainable. And here's the reality. Many military leaders feel they must choose between suffering in silence or risking their careers by seeking help. This conversation dives into the internal battles institutional resources often miss and how to protect career continuity, security, clearance, family stability, and personal integrity without compromising strength. Chris, welcome to the Happiness on Tap podcast. It is so wonderful to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll get started right away. Chris, I'd like to start by asking you to tell our listeners just a little about yourself and how you came to do the work that you're doing in the world.
Yeah, so I spent, 20 years in the Navy doing a whole bunch of things and spent a lot of time around people who performed really, really well, myself included, right? I did really important things in my job, but the coping strategies that I learned to deal with some of those things weren't always the most positive. And we just kind of learned that I just would go through and not make the right choices all the time because of things that I was dealing with that I just didn't know I was dealing with because we would just keep going. And that was kind of really where the biggest issue that I noticed was I was like, this isn't working for me anymore. And so I began really looking at how to make things easier and better for myself and my family and how to manage that. And that's when I really began this journey of like, how do I go through and become the husband and the father that I'm supposed to be and still work really well in my job and be successful, and realizing that I didn't have to choose between the two. And it's that choice, I think, that sometimes is we see some of that, where I have seen some of that difficulty, where we're either really good at home or we're really good in the workplace. And I wanted to know how to be better at it.
And so, what did that look like for you when you were first starting to figure out what needed to be changed and how you could change that? What was available to you?
So I didn't want to go see mental health. I mean, it's available. Everybody knows it's available, but we didn't want to go see, we affectionately would call them the wizard, but we didn't want to go see psych because we were worried about what it might do to my career. And that is something that I actively worked for other people to go and seek help in some of my roles. But going myself, I would just look for other strategies that weren't always helpful. So it's not that the resources aren't there. It's that they're either temporary or they don't really address the issue in a way that is helpful, or there is a fear of some sort of repercussion from being used, or the perception that you're just weak and not able to handle what everybody else is. Those are all the real issues. It took me to have a family issue with my daughter to really begin to seek help for my own stuff. because I couldn't handle all the things that she had going on. It was really affecting my work where I literally couldn't work anymore. Like I couldn't function from day to day. But then that's when I was like, okay, I have to get help because I can't perform anymore. And when I look back, I was like, I should have gone and gotten something earlier and it would have been easier to deal with, but we think we can handle everything and we can't always handle what we need to handle.
Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your story and what got you to that point of knowing that you needed to truly seek help in one way or another. And I know that in general, all of those things that you listed are very real for most people. The stigma, the worry somebody's going to find out, the worry it's going to affect your job or your career. And just as a man, most men are raised differently. Like you said, don't be weak, you don't need help, be strong, all those beliefs that we inherit. And so all those things really impact our ability to seek help until we do hit that wall and realize that we no longer have a choice, that our body has finally decided to scream at us instead of nudge us along the way by letting us know these things are happening. And I think for the majority of helpers and healers, including myself, that's where the journey started, was hitting that wall and realizing I could no longer ignore all those things that I had been pushing down, denying, ignoring, and that it was time to seek help.
Yeah. And that's exactly where, when I started to look for help, I didn't know where to go because you hear different things from different people and you try some of them. And especially in an environment where people are moving all the time, like you don't get the consistent care that you necessarily need. And we don't always focus on the easier things that I learned over time that help reduce some of the overwhelm and the stress, the things that we know are supposed to do that we just don't do, like the eating well, the sleeping, the breathing, those really simple basic steps that help relieve some of that stress from the beginning so that we don't reach overwhelm as quickly. And was some of the bigger things that I found useful came from some of those basic things and learning to accept, like, this is the way my brain works. These are the things I have to do to take care of myself. And that's okay. I might not be able to do what everybody else can do all the time, but when I do the things that I know I need to do to take care of myself, I perform really well. So I don't have to be just like everybody else.
You definitely covered a lot of important things in that. First, just not knowing where to go. Where do I start? How do I get help? That was a stumbling block as well for me because I always believed go to therapy. That's what we should do. We should go to therapy and find somebody to talk to. Great. How do I do that? Does my insurance require a referral? Do I have to get that from my primary care physician? Can I just seek out a therapist? What kind of therapist do I need? Not even knowing what all was going on in my body or even understanding the trauma that I was experiencing. So, how do you ask for help when you don't even know what kind of help you need?
Uh-huh.
So, I went down the road of, okay, I'm going to go see my primary care physician and get a referral. And so I explained to my physician what my body was experiencing, at least what I was able to verbalize. And her response was to hand me a prescription for an antidepressant, not a referral to a therapist. And so I left there feeling um, kind of defeated in that. Did I not say things clearly? Did I not share my experience in a way that she could understand what I was looking for? I made it clear that I didn't want to start on any antidepressants unless I absolutely had to, but I would want that decision to be made between me and a therapist if it was decided that that was something I needed versus a 10-minute visit with a primary care physician that just handed me a prescription without a diagnosis. And so it was a lot of learning along the way, starting into therapy, and also then learning all those other things that you say, the basic things that you think are so simple and we should know, making sure you're getting quality nutrition, making sure you're getting enough sleep at night, making sure you're getting exercise, utilizing our breath in a way to calm our anxiety, not just to breathe in and out. Like, how are you actually breathing and how can you breathe differently to reduce an anxiety flare or a panic attack? And so learning those things as well as learning other modalities. So I did a bunch of research based on the symptoms my body was experiencing. So I was like, okay, I'm experiencing brain fog and memory loss. I've never had either of those things show up in my life before. What caused these things? What's the root cause? And what can I do to improve it? And just doing that research took me down the rabbit hole of kind of self help and other healing modalities that were available to me when there were issues like not being able to get into a doctor, which is becoming more and more of a problem with so many doctors leaving the state. Um, whatever the case may be, there's some practices here that it's like a 2-year waiting list to even get in to see a doctor. So what do you do in the meantime?
Yeah, no, that is definitely relate to that. Now, I ended up going down a similar route, right? I ended up going and getting a master's in counseling because I wanted to figure this out. So like I went really deep into that, and that's before I even realized that something was wrong. Like I intuitively knew that something was wrong before I knew that something was wrong. Because I was seeking for answers before I knew what the question was, because that's just where I was going. And I didn't realize that there were so many factors that come into it. Like I'm really into how our brain works and like all of the things that cause our brain to function in the way that it is functioning. Like you mentioned, like brain fog and all of those things. And those are all tend to be exacerbated in the military community because of TBIs and head trauma and some of the other things and PTSD. And those all make those things more difficult. But those aren't just psychological phenomena. Those are also there's a physiological piece to that. And the VA, the military, well, they're really good at focusing on like PTSD as a psychological phenomena. This is like they'll do all the therapy, they'll do the things, but if we're not healing our brain, that only doesn't necessarily help the process. And those are some of the things that I get in that I enjoy looking into and figuring out, especially when it comes to medications, because I didn't want to take medicines. But then as I learned, I have ADHD. I coped really well for a long time. And then I hit a point where I was like, I can't cope anymore. And I talked to my doctor and they're like, let's get on medicine. And I was like, well, I don't really want to get on medicine because I don't like it. I also have to recognize that the chemicals in my brain and the neurotransmitters, the way that they work, is different than the average person in the population. So if I want to perform well, I need to be able to get my brain chemistry in the right place. Part of that is food. Part of that is like I don't eat gluten because it messes with how my head works and it causes brain fog and migraines for me personally. It took a long time for me to figure that out, but I did. um, and I take my medicine. I am not like anti-medicine, which surprises some people when they find out that I also, do everything that faith-based and based on the Bible, because a lot of people in church, unfortunately, hear that you shouldn't be taking medicine either for a mental health condition. So that is something that I deal with actually regularly. I deal with that more than that is just as a strong of a place where education is needed when it comes to mental health and our physiology and the physical reality of what's going on with our bodies, and trying to teach people that our mind and our body and our spirit, they're all aligned and you can't just treat one. You have to treat all three and your environment. But the fourth one is the environment. But when you're talking about the person, right, We're mind, body, spirit, and we got to work on our environment. And when we do those four things, we tend to do better. It's not a guarantee, but we tend to do better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on the throwing yourself into as much education uh, as I could. I did go back to school. I went back to school and got my certification as a health and life coach because that was my avenue for answering a lot of those questions. And so it started there after a year of focusing on my physical health and my mental health. That kind of came up and just was like, okay, here's the next step. Am I going to go back to the corporate world? Or am I going to find a career that I am more passionate about, that is more in line with my values? And so I did end up going back to school and getting certified. But things that I learned along the way, and my fascination, like you, was understanding the brain, but it was also understanding the mind body connection. And so, like we were talking about brain fog and memory loss, for me, those were symptoms of a trauma response. And it was how my body and my brain were responding to a trauma from 20 years prior that had been living in my body and living in my fascia and living in my nervous system. And until I really started doing the research and learning as much as I could about each individual thing I was experiencing, then I started learning more about my nervous system as a whole and understanding the connection with my vagus nerve that starts at the base of your brain and goes through your entire body. Just learning was the most beneficial thing I could do for myself, was to understand the different states that I was in either throughout a day, throughout a week, based on something that was happening around me, whether it was in the environment, the news, what was going on outside my house, or just in conversation with other people. How was my body responding to things? So I think for me, that was the most beneficial thing I could do for myself, was become educated.
Yeah. And that's what I do now is I try to shorten that education period for other people so they don't have to do a deep dive into all the things. They can come and we can talk and we can figure out what's going on, and then I can kind of short circuit all of that learning and give them what they need to know right away to make progress rather than I'm going to force you to go on a 5-year learning journey. They might have to do that anyways.
They may find themselves inclined to do that once they start going down that journey. But I think that really is our role in health and wellness and being helpers and healers, is that we help shorten that time for people. That is the goal. I don't, it took me, I would say, even the last 5 years, and I'm still learning and I'm still wanting to learn more. But when I talk to other people, especially therapists and psychologists, and I say, I feel like I lived under a rock for the first 45 years of my life. How did I never know these things existed? Things like energy work and sound healing and herbology. I mean, just there were so many things that that were never in my purview because I was busy raising kids and working in the corporate world. So I didn't know these things even existed. Same with the general focus on mental health and self care. Like, I had never heard the term operating from a full cup, as opposed to operating from the grounds at the bottom of a cup, which I had been doing my whole life. And when I bring that up to most professionals in the medical field or science, they say, well, honestly, that stuff has only become available for people to learn more about it in the last 5 to 8 years, when the book, The Body Keeps the Score, came out. And it sat on the bestseller list for over 300 weeks. And it really started making people aware of understanding how trauma is trapped in our body. And the very first, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I read the book. I think the very first chapter was specific to military personnel and soldiers.
Oh, sorry. I was looking to see if I had it on my shelf. I don't. I keep meaning to pick that one up. Yeah, I know it's the book. I just haven't bought it yet. I'm a book guy, so
I'm a book person as well. So let's talk about your work in that area. So you work with leaders who are high functioning, but under unsustainable pressure. What does that look like behind closed doors, not just for yourself, but for the other people that you are working with?
yeah. I like to start with your metaphor. You talk about moving from like living from a full cup. I actually teach people the opposite because I deal with overwhelm. So usually I always have a drink around it, and it's usually a coffee cup. But like, so when you have a coffee cup, right, you have you have the cup, and normally if it's usually it's a paper cup because I'm out, and they have like lines on them on the outside, and so like if you start your day here at the top when you wake up, this is where your level is. It only takes you this far to get to overwhelm, right? It's only like a quarter of an inch, and then your day is blown because you have lost focus. So how do I teach you some skills so that you start down here to give you the bandwidth to move and function in an environment where things aren't always as predictable as you'd like them to be. And a lot of time that shows up in little ways. We'll have, you know, you'll have a soldier or anybody really who is working really hard at work. They come home and they're yelling at their kids. They have no patience. They don't understand why they can't communicate with their wife when they work really well and function as a team at work. Or it can be the opposite where they're a hot mess at work because their home life is infecting their work life in not positive ways. So a lot of times it's just that overflow because we're not living in alignment with who we actually are, and we're trying to be all these things for everybody else, and we're not being honest about who we are. And a lot of times we just don't realize that that's how we're acting, and that there is a part of that symptom. I mean, your spouse, they may be a not great person, but part of the relationship that you're having with them is because of the other factors that you're bringing into that relationship. From work, you have your boss who's just really difficult to deal with, but he's your boss and he controls your addiction to, food, clothing, and shelter. So you shove all that in and you hold it in. You come home and you relax because it's your space. And so all that emotion comes out in your family. And then you don't understand why you have marriage issues or you're getting divorced because it's really less to do with your relationship with your spouse and more to do with your work relationship. That may not be fair. There's at least a part of it to do with other parts of your life.
Absolutely. And the biggest part of that goes to our ability to communicate with our partners, with our children about those things. And even some of that isn't necessarily what's happening at work. A lot of it you mentioned earlier is about the coping skills that we developed young in life that come from so many different directions. It comes from our home life. I know for myself, I grew up in a very volatile household. I was the child of abuse. So I had my own coping mechanisms, people pleasing. I was very codependent, and that carried throughout each of my relationships, not just my relationship with a partner, but my relationship with a boss, my relationship with my friends, because I stayed that people pleaser throughout my life, always saying yes when I should be saying no or could be saying no, pushing myself to that point of overwhelm because I don't know how to say no to protect my own peace and my own energy. So, these things come at us from so many different directions. And the more that we are able to communicate those things with our partner, with our children, with our friends, I even tried that with my boss, being honest with my boss about my trauma and how it was affecting me at work because that brain fog and memory loss was affecting me in my day to day duties. And I worked in the legal field. And so I hit up with the brain fog and the memory loss that I could operate on autopilot and I could complete a task. But the minute I would get up and walk away from my desk, I couldn't remember doing it.
Mhm. No, oh yeah, no, I was gonna say I can relate because I just I finally hit a point in my studies and everything where I literally spent like 2 weeks where I couldn't get out of my recliner because I had reached a point of actual burnout where I was just so exhausted. My body actually said no more because there was just so many things going on and just you haven't dealt with any of them. So we're just going to take over and you're done. So and that personal experience as a provider of any sort is what allows us, I think, to be so effective. It brings in that sense of empathy. It's not just like, oh, I've done a lot of research, so I know this is like what it kind of feels like. No, like I actually understand and I can relate. Maybe not to your exact situation, but I know what it feels like to feel helpless and like I don't control my body or I don't control or my mind is in a place where I don't know what's going on. So when you reach and like when you're honest like that with a client or a friend or anybody, that is when a real opportunity for healing for them becomes available. It's in that space. It's about which I have only really found in the coaching space. And I'm lucky my therapist is amazing and is that way as well. She kind of shares more than the typical therapist does. But it's the co-regulation, the co-empathy, the ability to realize I'm not the only one who sometimes feels like they really suck at life and realize that that's not accurate. Like that's my body is reminding me. I just don't listen to my body all the time because we live in a society and a time in history where we're not taught that our body is important, that it matters what we do, not just what we say or what we believe, but our actions have to align with that. If they don't, then we get into all kinds of problems. And our body doesn't forget. Our brain doesn't forget either. Our brain, and I tell people all the time, like, your brain has never forgotten one single thing you've ever done, one experience. It remembers it all. It may not recover that information, but it's in there because that's what it's designed to do, unless you have a severe traumatic brain injury or something of that nature. So like we are designed to work off of all of this knowledge of things that we have, but we ignore our sensory input of our body because we don't know what to do with it.
To, like you said, it's this opportunity for us to kind of get ahead of the game because if we don't and we continue to ignore those signals, that's where disease comes from. So there's a lot more research out there now showing that that's where autoimmune comes from is ignoring your stress level and not listening to your body and not paying attention. Like you explained, understanding the effect that gluten was having on your brain, I'm sure on your body, on your gut. When we just have a symptom and we go to a doctor and they prescribe us a pill or a quick fix or even give us a diagnosis, but they never look at the root cause or talk to us about what the root cause may be. How is your home life? What is your stress level? Are you getting enough sleep? They don't do that. Most doctors do not have the time or take the time to ask those questions. And so we really have to be our own authority, our own voice, and start listening to our bodies and do the research. Be your own voice when you go into a doctor's office and say, this is what's happening. I don't just want a diagnosis and a pill and be sent on my way. I want tools, I want skills. And that's where coaching is the kind of the third step between a medical doctor, a therapist, and then a coach. because we all have our different paths that we're there for. But as coaches, we're there to help teach you skills. We're there to help you look at your limiting beliefs, the beliefs you inherited as a child, your identity, your values, and who do you want to be? Do you want to be in line with your values? Well, let's look at that. Do you want to learn how to control your breath to control anxiety, panic, depression? Okay, let's look at that. Let's look at your sleep. Let's look at your nutrition. These are all things that a doctor's not going to do with you. Maybe even that, you may have a nutritionist that's going to look at your nutrition, or maybe a functional medicine doctor that's going to look at a few other different things. They're going to look at your blood work. They're going to look at a bunch of different things. But I think that's the benefit for us coaches that we can really bring to the table, is teaching
Yeah.
people skills and giving them tools to start taking care of themselves and to be their own advocate for themselves.
Yep. You literally just stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, like, really, coaching is about teaching our clients to be a self advocate. And I explained all. So I am my specialty, my coaching specialty is actually mental health coaching. So it's which is a really, I love this little like niche that I found for myself, because it allows me to help people who are struggling with some sort of mental health challenge, who may be going to therapy, and their therapy will help them deal with those past traumas and that past experience to overcome that. But my responsibility is to take them forward and like, okay, so you have this diagnosis of, you have anxiety, which is, that's really common. So how does that affect your day-to-day life? And what tools can we work through to help you succeed and manage that day to day? Now, your therapist can do that. They want to, but they know that their value is in helping you move from past to present and resolving the trauma. I can't do that. That's not my role. And so I work from today forward. And that doesn't mean we don't get into it a little bit. Like, I need a little bit of back, but like my goal is not to re-traumatize you. Nobody ever has to tell me what their story is. I just need to know, what are your symptoms and how can I help you with those? Like, one of my favorite ones that I deal with is like anxiety and PTSD with military people who don't know how to breathe, which is almost comical to the point, because the military teaches us how to breathe. Because when you learn to shoot a weapon, they teach you to control your breath. So it's teaching you to take a skill you actually already have in the case of some, and repurpose it, because we don't realize that that's a skill we already own. We own the skill of self-regulation already, and transforming it to a new situation and just a new life, and realize that it's the same process. And it's like, so it's just, it's things like that. It's like, we have the skills. Nobody alive doesn't know how to breathe. But do we know how to breathe properly for this situation? Can I figure out what I need to do right this minute?
Yeah, and I'll throw another example of that. In my journey, one of the first things that I did after starting therapy was meditation. I had never meditated a day in my life, didn't ever believe it was possible, thought I had too many mind monkeys running everywhere. I didn't believe I could slow myself down to actually meditate. And the first piece of that was learning how to breathe correctly. And, like you said, we all breathe, so we think we know how to breathe, but breathing correctly was a skill that I had to develop. I had to learn how to use my breath to control my thoughts, use my breath to control anxiety in my body, learn how to do a body inventory and figure out where I was holding stress. And that the power of the breath itself and my focus on the breath, I could move the breath through my body to that part of my body that was holding on stress, and have that breath help push it out of my body and release it into the earth if I was laying on the ground. There's just so much power in that knowledge.
And what I love is that there was a point where that knowledge, right? It's put into it's put in a very spiritual space, or it was in the past, which made it inaccessible for some people just because of how they perceive the world. But that in reality, there's so much research on neurofeedback and biofeedback. Like you can physically see people change their heart rate or the temperature in their hands through their breath with practice. So like I can go and I can show somebody a scientific study. As much as I believe in faith and spiritual, like that's not a place where a lot of people that I work with can enter the space. But there's so much science behind it now that I can actually be like, there is science like I can show you the science. Like we talk about it all the time. Like we talk about brainwaves, and then when I tell them that they can control their brainwaves, they're like, no, what? Like, yeah, like that is literally what we talk about. The different brainwaves of sleep, for example, right? But when you talk about energy work and you use those words, it kind of freaks people out. Still, a lot of people that I talk to a lot. But then when I talk about the VA offered you an alpha stim device, right? They're like, yeah. Do you know what that does? No. It changes your brain waves. Like that's literally changing the energy that your brain is outputting through sound. Like they're like, what? Yeah. Like that's what it does. And they're like, oh. So then they become more open to other modalities because they begin to realize it's not like crazy pseudoscience or whatever you want to use. Like this stuff actually, like it works because it works. And that's the important piece. And bridging that gap, I think, is really important for me personally, because that's just the kind of people that I tend to attract to myself are those who are, they're a little like, they just are naturally questioning of everything.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. That's a big piece of why I started this podcast. Honestly, the biggest piece of why I started this podcast was because I wanted to share the information that I had obtained working with these different alternative medicine practitioners that really helped me with my brain fog, memory loss, panic attacks, anxiety, hypervigilance, all of these things I learned how to control through learning more about these other modalities. And so, I worked with a sound healer. So I experienced how sound frequency, like you said, moves through our body and how that changes our brain patterns, how that changes how our bodies hold on to stress. I strongly recommend and love going to a sound healing experience with singing bowls and tuning forks and remembering that our bodies are mostly water. And so that sound hits that water and we're a vibration. And so
Yeah.
there's the science there.
I personally can't do it because my tinnitus and my hearing, like I have to leave the room at certain pitches, unfortunately. So there are things where people can't, like, it's okay. Like you go and you don't like the experience. It's not for you.
Mhm.
That is something like I tell people all the time. Like when you begin to take ownership of your own body and health, you no longer become the person who just takes the prescription or takes the advice of the doctor and does, like, you do the research and you're like, oh, like that actually doesn't really work for me. So like when my yoga teacher does sound bowls, because she does them every week, like I go and I put my ear pods in because they help block some of the sound so it doesn't make my head want to explode. And I love her, and I love, like I know what it does to my body and I know it's good for me, but with my inner ear stuff, it doesn't always work well. So being aware of, oh, try it, try everything, be curious. And if it doesn't feel right, oh, like that's not the thing for me right now. It may be later. And I feel like that's something to really be curious about, how to be in our own bodies, I think is really important. and not just in our head. Even though we are talking mostly about mental health, our body will tell our mind what's going on. So if we can be aware of our body, then we can be more able, we can keep that coffee cup just a little bit less full if it's not overwhelmed. And I really have to thank my son for all this. So my son is on the spectrum. So I learned a lot about sensory input through him and how to help him deal with his day. And I've learned stuff that I was like, why did I know that like a weighted blanket is the best thing in the world? I'm like, it's like magic.
Yep. And that is it's just our lack of knowledge. And now you see a lot more adults who are questioning their own like ADHD after their child has been diagnosed. And now they're like, oh, okay, so I also have that and it was never diagnosed. And so science is catching up very slowly. It should be catching up a lot faster, but we got to take it for what it is. And like you said, do the research, figure out what works for you. If something doesn't work for you, that's fine. You don't have to take that with you. I love building my toolbox or tool bag, as I call it. So I have all these different modalities and I can pick and choose what I need when I need it.
Hmm.
So that may be identifying what a trigger is that I'm having right now and which tool can best help me to keep me from getting a heightened sense of anxiety or going off into a panic attack. Like I know I have tools available to me when I go, okay, I know this is a triggering situation. I know this is something that can affect me, but I can also ask myself the big questions like, is this really happening to me right now? Or is this my brain trying to keep me safe? So then I get to choose. Do I want to sit down with this feeling and understand more about it? Or do I want to use a tool to separate myself from it? So there's just so much that comes along with that learning phase and obtaining this information that we can figure out what works for us personally and
Yeah.
keep that in our toolbox and leave the rest.
Like I have a client right now. Like for weeks we were working on trying to get him to breathe. He's like, I just can't do it. And finally he was like, I had some trauma when I was a kid, and like every time I breathe, it like when I focus on my breath, it like it brings back, it was a something with breath. So he's like, I can't use, so I can't, it freaks him out every time he does that. It's a trigger. And I was like, okay. So we taught him grounding. So he puts his hands on the table and he grounds. And I was like, because then like, let's focus on your physical presence then. And he was like, how's that feel? He's like, that's so much better. And I was like, okay, like you have to be able to explore and be honest and say things don't work. Because we were forcing something because that, like, we all say breathe. Like when you're anxious, just breathe. It makes it worse for him. And I was like, well, okay, then we got to figure something else out.
And that's wonderful is being able to pivot with our clients and offer multiple things that can help them. Grounding is one of my favorites. There's, eye movement and orienting yourself, feeling your own presence, your own feet on the floor, your butt in the chair, those grounding tools can be just as powerful as breath, and having him be able to identify that his problem or his issues with being able to breathe in a way that can calm him was stemmed from a childhood experience is powerful in itself, because then like you were saying, then we know, okay, this is not for you, but let's try something else. And at the same time he's still very aware that that is a trigger
Yep.
for him.
And I didn't have to go through, he didn't have, we didn't go through that trauma. Like he is able to process that on his own with somebody else. Like he just identified, he's like, hey, this doesn't work for me because something happened. And I was like, okay, like we respect that we are not the people for that conversation, because we don't want to just have somebody spill their trauma just because we want to know what it is. Right? We want to respect their healing process by not forcing them to share and overshare again and again and again. which is one reason why people in the military don't like to go to therapy, because our therapists tend to bounce around a lot because they PCS as well. So they move and get orders. So you end up having to retell your story over and over again. And so like you just end up not wanting to get seen because you just end up re-traumatizing yourself and like it's not worth emotional pain. You'd rather just deal with it another way.
That kind of goes into my next question, which is why do so many service members mistrust institutional resources, even when those resources are designed to help them?
So part of the reason is there is a difficulty in syncing up with resources that stay. I mean, I go to the VA, I still have military medicine, and right, part of the reality is, those are government systems, and so our providers, they're amazing, but they tend to not stay for super long because it's a government paid job. And that's part of the reality of the system. And part of we talk about this a lot in some of the groups that I go to, and it's just the availability. It's a lot of work and effort to finally get in and get seen and get through some of the stuff, and sometimes the experience isn't positive. Like it is, like I'm sure you've been to the dentist and like the front desk clerk isn't always, super nice and friendly. But when that happens regularly and you're already at the top of your cup, you don't want to engage in that system. And there are barriers that are not purposely put in, but there are a lot of people who, like, the VA hires veterans. So there are veterans sitting on the other side of that desk who are also probably in a heightened state, and then they have to deal with veterans on the receiving end who are coming in a heightened state, and so there just tends to be a lot of conflict. And there are some just institutional issues with the system in general. I mean, I'm lucky. I live in San Antonio, right? And in the San Antonio area, we have one of the best VA systems in the country, and we still have issues. Like I'm blessed enough that we have an acupuncturist, but I can get in for like a 6-week block, and then I have to wait like 4 months to get in because we have like two that we can see, because the requirements are pretty strict and you're not allowed to go out into town and have it paid for. So you have to be willing. Like when I can't get in, I go and pay out in town because I know it's worth it. But it's hard sometimes to just get through all of the red tape of the system when you're already at a state that you need help. Like now, it's just difficult. It's not any single person's fault. There's a lot of veterans, and the VA is a big system. There's a lot of doctors, there's a lot of people, and everybody does their best within the framework that they're given. But the framework itself it's big and it's clunky and it's run by the government and it's just hard. And some of that is left over we still have Vietnam veterans, a lot of them who hang around, and they kind of they're the ones who really began with that institutional, like, we can't trust the government to take care of us. And so some of that just kind of gets passed along naturally from feelings of not being taken care of from the beginning, especially with our Vietnam veterans. And then you see things where it just kind of compounds. So that's kind of where it comes from. It's complicated, but I don't know I hope that helps answer your question. That's what I've seen. Like that's all personal anecdote, right?
Yeah, no, actually, you covered a lot of things that were my experience with my dad before he passed. When I would go with him to the VA for his appointments, he was an amputee. And so I would go with him for his appointments to get his prosthetics and to relearn how to walk. And the amount of time in between appointments and continuity of providers and all of that were definitely all barriers to his healing just for his physical self, not just his mental self. So they were things that I experienced just from taking my dad to appointments at the VA. And you also mentioned, when we come to that point where it's, do I get care that it may take me 6 months to a year to even get the care that I need because it's covered under my VA benefits? Or do I look outside and find other alternatives that I'm going to have to pay for out of pocket, just like you and I as coaches, unless we're a coach under an insurance company or a large organization, most of us are out of pocket providers. And so many times people just don't have the funds available to seek the services that they need. So they're stuck in this position where they have to deal with what they can get out of their VA benefits. And so it's hard. It's hard for everyone.
Yeah, everybody will agree. I know people on both sides. I know people who work at the VA and people who, and I go to, like, I see it from every angle, and it's everybody knows that it's not a perfect system, but it's also not necessarily easy thing to just say we're going to fix it. I mean, you hear that a lot. And that's part of the frustrating thing. Like, you'll hear like, oh, this thing is going to get better. And then when you look at your personal scenario, it's not getting fixed as fast as it should, or as fast as they say that it should. So, and not everybody can make the separation between, okay, like they put out a policy or they put out a news release saying that this and that this thing is going to change, and the recognition that that implementation of that policy is months or years down the pipeline in reality doesn't help the problem today. And if you're not in a good space already, you can't recognize that. So why would I go and try to work through when I already know, or I think I know, that this isn't going to work for me. I'm not going to get the answer I want. I'm not going to get the help I need. They're going to tell me I'm fine and just give me a pill rather than actually help me heal. Then why should I go? I'll just deal with this myself. That's what I tend to hear, and which is unfortunate, because then you keep going and going and going until you literally can't anymore. And then it becomes an actual emergency, either um, a physical emergency or a mental emergency, because if our brain doesn't take control and stop us and say that we need help, our body is going to be like, I can't handle this anymore, and I'll have a heart attack, or I'll have, increased inflammation, and I'll just get sick and put you in the hospital, or something like that, where you're going to end up you get worse physically instead of getting better, because you're not getting the help that you need for the simpler things, which is unfortunate. And that's really what it is. That's kind of where we're at, and it's unfortunate.
It is. I agree 100%. Um, and so we're having this wonderful conversation about these things, about listening to our bodies. But for those people that just aren't really paying attention, aren't listening to their bodies, they're busy lifing as we do, what are some of the warning signs that a leader is approaching an unsustainable threshold? Just so we can throw it out there so people can say, I'm experiencing that.
Yeah, I think we've kind of touched on a few of them throughout our discussion. One would be like the brain fog, an increased level of fatigue, a lack of enjoyment in the things that you like to do because you just don't want to do with it. Increased irritability. There may be an increase in a level of anxiety, or a reduction in performance, or the feeling that you need to overperform because you're worried about something not going right. Lack of sleep. You're missing you're missing meals, or you're overeating, especially your comfort foods. So your sugars, your sweets, your crunchy foods. Everybody has their go-to. Like I'm an ice cream guy, but everybody has their thing. Could be an increase in impulsivity. So you are spending more, going shopping more. Like you're coping in another way that is not necessarily helpful. Could be an increase in alcohol use, or an increase in prescription use, or just increase in I'm now using my Aleve like every day when I wasn't, because my body's inflamed and I don't realize it. So it's a really difficult question because it depends on the person, because that was like a huge litany of things. And you can go on for forever because it's very individualized. You have to, unfortunately, kind of know what your normal state is to know that it's off. Perhaps the best thing would be to talk to the people who are closest to you and make sure you check in regularly and they are honest with you about who you are. Maybe it's not your spouse, because sometimes your spouse only sees one side of you, but that's a good person, right? In the military, we tend to have work spouses. That's the person who you do all the things with at work, who they take care of you at work. It's a joke. Like, you have your work wife, or like, if you're a senior executive, it tends to be your secretary, like the person who just takes care of you when you're at work, or your buddies who can be honest with you, not the guy who you go out and drink with on Saturday night, but the guy, if you have one, that you tell, like, when you call when stuff really hits the fan. And you get them to be like, hey, check in with them once a month and be like, hey, am I being a fool lately? Or are my decisions off? Or you have to look at objective measures. Am I spending more on things that I'm not supposed to be spending on? Am I going out more? Am I ignoring my kids? And that's the hard part, is really becoming aware. Once you become aware, then it's like, okay, what do I do about it? Um, that's the next step. But becoming aware is really difficult.
It is. It is because it's so easy to indulge in those distractions, those comfort items, those impulsities, scrolling on your phone for hours
And
on end. Did you ever used to do that before? I mean, my age, we didn't even have cell phones. And so I try to leave it at home when we leave the house. One of us will have a phone more for an emergency type situation, but there's many times we leave and we're both like, no, neither of us are taking the phone. Like, if there's something going on, we'll figure that out when we get home. But for right now, I just want to be present with you in
Mhm.
a meal or in an outing or whatever it is we're doing. And so those were things that I started to notice for myself as a coach and building my business as an entrepreneur, was how much time was I investing in social media, because I kept telling myself, oh, I'm doing this for my job to try to find clients. But how much of it was I really just messing around on social media and not being present with my husband, with my kids? And so I made conscious choices like, okay, this really isn't benefiting my business at all. I'm spending hours on end creating posts and people aren't even seeing them. But, I'm stuck in this trap of thinking I have to do this. But I really started to notice how it was affecting me in the evenings after work, when I should have been present with my husband. I still had my phone in my hand and I would scroll to see if anybody had liked or commented or shared something that I had done for this like weird external validation, when honestly all that mattered to me was my husband.
Mhm.
Those things really didn't matter. They really weren't part of my values. And so it's like you said, it's that awareness and looking at the things that we're doing differently that we didn't do before, and do we like who we're becoming? And so yeah, that is really the number one first step in the process towards change to who we want to be. Chris, I really have enjoyed this conversation greatly. I want to thank you for coming here and talking with me and sharing your story and talking about how you work with people in the military, how those things intersect with your faith, and what kind of things are available to people. I really appreciate, especially coming from a male perspective. I think that's so valuable because I have a whole lot of women on my podcast, but I love to have more men come on to help break that stigma about mental health,
Mhm.
to help more men understand what's available out there to them, and um, that they don't always have to fear what might happen if they should choose to seek help. How can people connect with you, Chris?
Yeah. So the easiest way is my email right now, Chris at bearded coach.com. My website is bearded coach.com. It's in the process of being reconfigured, so it might look a little wonky for a little bit. But those are the two best ways. And I had a great time talking with you. I appreciate it. as always.
I will make sure and include your email address. I did have your website here ready for the show notes, but I will include your email address as well so that people have another way to reach out to you. If, for our listeners, if you or someone you love carries military responsibility, I hope this episode helped provide you some avenues and information so that you can start listening to your body, understanding your brain, becoming educated for yourself. Strength isn't silence, integrity isn't isolation. There is a way to protect your career, your family, and your legacy without compromising who you are. Be sure to connect with Chris and learn more about his work through the Bearded Coach LLC. And if this conversation resonated, please share it with somebody who carries more than they show, because the strongest leaders deserve support too. Chris, thank you again for your time and for coming here today.
No, I appreciate you.